Hello, and welcome to the Wake Up with Gratitude podcast. I'm your host, Julie Boyer, and today I have Michelle Abraham joining me all the way from the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning, Julie. Thanks for having me.
Oh, so excited. Okay, I'm secretly doing this podcast just for me because I met Michelle through one of her businesses, my podcast coach, which is for entrepreneurs with big positive messages and missions. And there's a Facebook group that I found out about through a mutual friend. And I have just learned so much from this group. I mean, Michelle is an incredibly powerful entrepreneur. She's the founder of Amplify You and my podcast coach. She is the host of Blissful Parenting. She really understands how to help you launch your podcast, get you paid for doing your podcast, how that all works. She's also in a brand new book that you might have already heard about because actually a few of our guests are featured, but I haven't mentioned it yet. It's coming out on International Women's Day. So by the time you hear this, it will be out. It's called Pursuit 365, and it's the story of incredible Canadian women all the way across from Nova Scotia to British Columbia, coast to coast. Can't wait to hear about it. And so Michelle, I would love to hear a little bit of kind of how you got into this world of podcasting. Like what were you doing before that brought you into this world that you really are an expert in?
Oh, thank you so much for the introduction, Julie. It's funny how I got started with podcasting has nothing to do with business, but I previously to the podcasting world that I'm in now, I was actually in the wellness industry. I was a personal trainer. I owned a fitness studio in North Vancouver. I had boot camp locations across BC in 9 different cities. And I was running a rockin' fitness business. And then I got pregnant and life happened. And I was so excited to be a mom. So it was great, but I really had to think a little bit differently about my business. I built myself a really nice jailhouse, I call it, because I was at this fitness studio like 14 hours a day and staff everywhere. And yeah, anyway, so we pared down the fitness studio quite a bit. I became a new mom and I met this girl at a networking event and she had this great idea. She's like, wouldn't it be great that like when we became moms, we had a workplace to go to that like we could have a daycare on one side and workspace on another side. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. So we launched a co-working space, which was the first co-working space outside of the lower mainland area, outside of downtown Vancouver in BC. So now there's in that city, there's about 14 co-working spaces, but at the time, it was the first one outside of that space. And it was, it's an education experience where you get to a suburb and you realize people have like big houses and offices and they don't need a co-working space quite yet, or they don't understand what a co-working space is. Never mind, we could not fit into the bylaws with trying to figure out like how to run a daycare there as well. That just was too advanced for, I think, the community at the time. So anyways, we gave up on the daycare side of things and we opened this co-working space. And so one day I was at home with my son and I noticed my business brain got a little mushy since I became a mom. And, I was like, I love playing with him, but oh gosh, my business brain. So I turned on the Apple TV and I noticed this purple button and I was like, oh, what's this purple button? What's a podcast? And so I turned on this podcast thing and I listened to this show called Eventual Millionaire by Jamie Tardy. And I was like, oh my gosh, she was interviewing these amazing people who would become millionaires by starting and growing a business. I became addicted to it. There wasn't very many choices of podcasts out there, but this one was perfect for me, as well as Amy Porterfield's Online Marketing Made Easy podcast just launched. This was back in 2012. So I go to my friends, I'm like, oh, I'm listening to this podcast. They're like, what the heck is a podcast? What are you talking about? So I soon realized that I can like listen to the podcast in my car. I could listen to it as I'm going for a walk with my son. And so I started consuming all of these things. So for me, that's where podcasts started. That's where my love of it came. And then I started doing podcast meetup groups at my co-working space to the Vancouver Podcasters Meetup Group, which I can only find 2 or 3 people that any was that knew anything about podcasting to come in as guests. And it's just funny how that all started. But back more and more events and more meetups and more into it, and I started then helping people with their shows. So that's kind of how it all started.
Oh my goodness, Michelle. It's so awesome because I didn't know the beginning of your story. And I wrote down something because it really resonated with me. And I think it'll resonate with a lot of entrepreneurs that have a brick and mortar business, which is I built myself a jail.
Yeah.
right? Because you are
Yeah.
literally trapped to your
Mhm.
actual physical space. And I know that I have a number of good friends in the fitness industry, especially
Mhm.
right now. It's been a year of the pandemic, and those, especially in Ontario, the other end of Canada, because they've had so many shutdowns. My
Mhm.
friends with gyms are in, I mean, they're in serious, serious trouble of losing everything. So
Mhm.
that's a really interesting thought to think about when you're building a business, is like, what would happen if, right? And I imagine you were even saying your co-working spaces, of course, have changed as well in the past year,
Mhm.
right? I imagine at the beginning, did they have to shut down at the beginning?
Yeah, I think they all shut down at the
Yeah.
beginning, and I work out of one here on the Sunshine Coast, and it's only now that people are allowed back in it, really. And at the time when we had that business, I actually got myself a jail twice because then I opened this co-working space that I spent all my time at. So I didn't
Right.
learn the lesson the first time. I did it again the second time, but now I'm so grateful that we can just run my business from here on the boat access side of where we live. So it's just so much nicer now to have the flexibility and freedom to be able to do business where I need to do it and be more about family then.
Freedom. That word resonates with me so much.
Mhm.
I did a webinar myself last night called Work from Anywhere, because this idea of that we can build businesses from our phones today, we just need an internet connection. We can have that freedom to just do the things that light us up. And when I hear you talk about podcasting, your whole face lights up. So for those that are listening and not watching the video, worth popping over and watching the YouTube video to just see how Michelle's body language changes when she talks about how excited she was to get, into the whole podcast community. So tell me a little bit more, because you've got two different sides to the business. So
Mhm.
what is kind of the Amplify You side versus the My Podcast Coach side?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started Amplify You first. And Amplify You, the mission has always been we want to be like Hey House for podcasters. So we want to work with people that are out there making a huge impact in the world. And we recognize that those people need some support. So we are working with people who are thought leaders and authors, coaches, speakers who are just got this big thing that they've got to share with the world and a big message. But what we can do to support them is help them manage their show so they don't need to learn the editing and the social media stuff and all that kind of stuff. So we do a done for you service at Amplify You where we help them launch their show and then manage it on a weekly basis. So we have podcast managers that do that. And then I was
Okay,
networking.
wait, I
Yeah,
just want to pause
yeah,
for one
sure.
sec,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of stuff in there and people might not even know some of the things that you're talking about.
Mhm.
So before we talk about the other half of what it is that you do, what's a podcast manager?
Yeah, so a podcast manager is really like someone who has your show. So they are going to babysit your show. No, I'm just kidding. They're going to actually, you're going to record. And so what we like to do is keep our experts in the recording creation stage. So they record, and once they're done recording, that's it. They don't need to do anything else.
Okay.
So those files then come to the podcast manager. The podcast manager will edit them, put the intro and the music onto it. They will then publish it on the publishing platform. They will
Okay.
then create an audiogram, some social media images, maybe even email back to the guests them, and then promote it on social media so that they have all that taken care of. And then we can give some files back to the hosts and then they can promote it further. So it's a totally done for you service so
Okay.
that you can stay in your content zone of genius and content creation.
Cool. And does the podcast manager also help with like writing the like description of the show and coming up with the title, or is that more the host that comes up
Yeah,
with
so
that?
we have a mixture of shows. Like some hosts love doing that themselves. That is
Okay.
the creation, that's content creation. Other hosts love the support of someone else doing it. So then we would listen to the show, transcribe it, grab the quotes, grab the important things for the show notes, and write them for them.
Well, I have to say, I mean, I was doing everything by myself until a few episodes ago. And I listened to that and I'm like, I do all that stuff by myself. And,
Mhm.
it's interesting. I'm a little bit of the like, I like to figure things out by myself and then hire out
Mhm.
later. But I would say, here's what I would say, because most people aren't like me. Most people don't want to figure out how to do the audio editing of their show. And most people don't want to do copywriting because it's really hard. It's really hard, like finding the name of your show. So a program like this, it's really cool for someone who says, like, I really do want to launch a podcast, but
Mhm.
I really don't know all the rest of that stuff, but I know I have a message that I want to share. And is that also part of
Mhm.
the way that you support people? Like someone says, I just have an idea, Michelle. Like, can we have like, do you do coaching? Is that what the coaching part is a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we
Okay.
actually will work on the creation, the positioning. There's actually quite a bit of strategy that goes into launching a podcast and like having it not what we call pod fade. So pod fade is those people like, oh, I want a podcast, turn on the microphone and start going without any thought. Typically end up after 10 episodes or so stopping
Mhm.
because either one, they're not prepared and there's so much work in the back end of it, or they're not trying to figure out how to like actually like make this podcast a weekly thing, or not getting the support that they need. So, in order to prevent that, we really do a lot of coaching on really making sure the messaging is right. They're speaking to the right audience. They're making sure that the way the creative like this that's so cool, as you know, Julie. Like the podcasting space is so interesting. It's up to your creativity. Like there's some things that we
Yeah.
see are working really well, but at the end of the day, like though it's wide open for creativity of how you want to design a show, how you want it to come out, and what you want to do. So we work on that creative aspect of it, of designing the show too.
Well, and I think the really important thing you said there is this pod fade thing where you do, 10 episodes or you do 10 and then you stop and come back. And when a show stops, of course, then it really loses its momentum because people aren't seeing it in their top shows
Mhm.
anymore. They're not seeing it in their downloads. And yeah, the creativity part is so important because there are like probably a million different health and wellness podcasts, but it's like, what is yours specifically going to be about? What is your area of expertise and what lights you up? And I think one of the things that I learned early on in my podcasting journey is I need to talk about things that I'm excited about and that interest me. And then, I mean, of course, for me, it all ends up coming back into gratitude because I think that's really important. But that's like the thread that I weave through as opposed to like picking people specifically for a topic. And I think that's what I do. And I also, what kinds of, so we know interview style is a type of podcast. What other
Mhm.
kinds of podcasts do people do?
Yeah, I think there's so many out there. I mean, we work with such a small, unique bunch of people in the podcasting space because they're really, at the end of the day, entrepreneurs that want to see their return on their investment of their time and build relationships with their podcasts and those kind of things rather than going out there for the monetization and ads and sponsorship and those kind of things. So I think, what we're seeing is more shows that are interview based or solo shows where you're teaching something, or just like yours, Julie, where you have a common theme throughout the show that works really well and resonates, and it's kind of like a bigger umbrella, so that when people do come into your world, you can filter them into other programs and services or communities along the way. It's a little bit of a broader topic. But out there in the rest of the podcasting space, there's sports shows, there's hobby shows, travel shows, true crime, there's all sorts of different kinds of topics and also different ways of doing it, where it's episodic, where it's each one's a different one, or there's a serial one where each one is connected to the next. There's, oh gosh, so many different kinds. There's
So,
tons of people come on, or there's hired actors that do them. So many different things out there right now.
and I think that's what's really fun is that, if you're listening to this episode and you're like, I'm not an entrepreneur, I don't have a business, but I like this podcasting thing. And the cool thing is now mine is recorded as a video as well. I enjoy that YouTube. Actually, what's really incredible is one of my YouTube videos has like way more downloads than the audio does because of the topic, because we talked about a near death experience. And
Mhm.
that search through YouTube is like a really big search thing. So the video has done really, really well. And so that's a cool opportunity for other people that would never have heard, Adele's beautiful message to
Mhm.
see her through YouTube. And that's one of the reasons why I do the video as well, because it allows people to see the visual thing. But if you're not comfortable on camera, if you're like, I don't want to show my face, and you just want to tuck yourself into a closet, which is the best place to record a podcast in a
Totally is.
right walk-in closet.
Yeah. With lots of clothes in
Yeah,
it.
exactly. Your sound will be amazing. Maybe that's an idea, right? Like you don't have, and I like, maybe you tell a serial or maybe you, just share stories. Like the opportunities are endless, and working with an expert can really help. Now, what I love is that, Michelle, you do so much for free. You really serve this community in ways that I'm always surprised. I'm like, Michelle, like, I just feel like you really are so generous to our community. And one of the things that I have been a part of is this bi-monthly, we meet, I guess, every other Friday.
Mhm.
We meet with a group of people who are interested in being on podcasts or podcasters themselves. So what was the inspiration for bringing people together on a Zoom like this?
My gosh, it's one of my favorite things that we do in our business, actually. And it's funny, it's not a paid thing that we do. It's just our give back to our community.
Yeah.
And it's because we have such incredible shows that we work with in our community. And I was seeing these shows, and they need guests on their shows. And I was meeting all these incredible guests at networking events and all these things out there in the world. And I was like, they need to be on these shows. And then I was like, how can I connect them together? And then there's only one of me. So that's really weird. This podcast Collaborate and Connect call was born, was that, we want everyone to kind of meet and be a part of this community, and we want them to, meet each other. And like, there are so many incredible things, like you talked about Adele's story. Like, Adele and I live like 20 minutes apart from each other
Oh,
here on the coast,
cool.
and we've been working with her for the last few years. And it's like that, those are the people that we want to connect with other people. And so we're just so grateful that you came into our community too, Julie, because you've been able to connect with so many interesting people, and so many people that had you on their podcasts. And I think it's been just that cool. I always like to say, and my mom used to say this, she used to say, I love it when my kids all get together. And like, that meant like when my brother and I would hang out outside of just family dinner time things. And so I kind of feel the same way, where like all of our podcasters and our friends from our communities get together and record podcasts, right? So I feel like that kind of mother goose kind of thing,
Yeah.
which I think is super cool. I think it's one of my favorite things that we do, and everyone's always looking to get more exposure or get more shows, or it's really hard to find guests if you don't know a lot of people. So it's a good way, or you're new to the space, so it's a good way to get out and meet people.
Well, what you mentioned there about finding guests. So the first 50 or so episodes of my podcast were all people that were like no more than 1 degree of separation from me, right? Like it was someone I knew directly, or someone that I knew had referred. There weren't really people outside of my circle. And then when I went to that first one, which was months ago, I really did start to connect with people that were strangers, right? I didn't know them at
Mhm.
all before. I hadn't connected. And then connecting with those people, because now all these people are connected through Facebook. So every time you like add a new friend, you're like, oh, you're connected to all my podcast friends. And not everyone's going to be on my podcast and vice versa. We don't have time for that. But it is really a cool way to meet people that you would not otherwise. And it's also like, it's a it's a positive place to hang out, right? It's an
Mhm.
encouraging community. And what I like is that it's clear what we're here for, right? Tell us about your podcast. Tell us
Mhm.
about the guests you're looking for. And if you're a guest, what do you have to give? And I like that, because it's like, you know exactly what you're expected to,
Mhm.
why you're expected to be there, and the messaging is clear, and you're allowed to promote what you're doing. So I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you love it. It's one of my favorite things, and I am a total connector. So
Yeah.
this just allows me to do it on a bigger scale in a short amount of time and connect so many people. I'm like, oh yeah, Julie, you need to connect with these two people on this call. And yeah, I just love it. So thanks for bringing that up.
So you mentioned that you're a connector. Now, is that something that kind of you developed as you were a business owner, or you just kind of always been the one that brings everybody together?
I've always been the one that brings everyone together. I
Yeah.
used to have several different groups of friends, my soccer friends, my Girl Guide friends, my, friends from all sorts of different places. I used to bring them all together and get them all to hang out, and then they became friends. And yeah, that's always something that I did. And something I love doing. And so I'm always going to do it. So this was a great way to do it if we're in the podcasting community, I think.
And I think too, I mean, we talked about the freedom and the not being in the like the creating your own, work jail. You live in a really fairly isolated place. Like I don't know if people caught that at the beginning, but she said that they have to take a boat to their car.
Right
So
over
they
there.
really, yeah, right behind, you can see if you're watching the video. And so that's really like, you're not going to go to a networking event every day and every week anymore. Neither am I. I mean, I moved to Vancouver Island, and when I first moved here a couple years ago, I found one group that met once a month that I wanted to kind of be involved with. But I mean, I came from Ontario, where I would network at least once a week. I'd be at a live event, all the time, driving. And then I would reduce my circle of like, because I was driving so much. But then you're meeting the same people at every networking group. So I was like, okay, then I'll go further. I'm like, the gift of being able to meet and connect online, I think,
Mhm.
really gives you the opportunity to live where you live. I live on Vancouver Island, but then still connect in this way. Do you think that the fact that, we are in a global pandemic, do you think that made a really big difference in how, more people are wanting to connect in podcasting world?
Huge, yeah. This year for us, I mean, as our business has grown, like it's literally tripled in size this year. From people who want to reach their audience through podcasting as a podcast host, but also people who want to now be on podcasts. And I think when everything was shut down for a few months there earlier last year, people really realized, oh, how else are we going to be connecting with our audience? And like you, Julie, like I was grateful for all these networking events popping up online because I too had one group that I joined here, and it was like, I couldn't make it to the meetings in the winter because it was dark to get across the lake at night, and like I have a 4 o'clock curfew in the winter.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't, I was feeling kind of like I'm missing my business friends, and used to do a lot of networking in Vancouver, and just that was not a reality. And so I found some really great groups online here, and that's why we started the Connect and Collaborate call. And I swear that's our business has really become global. We have clients in 5 different countries now.
Yeah.
Really, I think thanks to online networking.
Yeah. And that's cool too, because again, like there are so many people I've met through that call that like geographically I would never meet. Like we wouldn't
Right.
end up at the same networking event no matter how hard we tried. So that's also a really big gift. I did a short webinar. I did a cool little thing on how to feel more comfortable on Zoom. And I did just a webinar last weekend, and it was like a last minute thing. I was like, I'm just gonna do this webinar. Whoever wants to listen, I'll help you with your setup, because I've learned how to have a setup because now I podcast and I do video all the time. So I just like, I'm going to share what I know. And, there were like 20 people who showed up, but they were in Canada, US, and Mexico,
Right.
right? Like they
All over the
never,
place, right?
like, how else could I serve this community?
Yeah, I
There
love
just
it.
isn't another way. So, well, what I love too, Michelle, is that you bring this like enthusiasm and positivity, into wherever you show up. It really does. You can tell how much you really love being around people and connecting people. Where does gratitude fit in for you? Is that something
Mm.
you've practiced for a while? Is it a daily thing, or is it just the way you live? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, my real gratitude in my life started. Well, I would say like I was part of Girl Guides growing up, and that I feel like they instilled that really great like gratefulness in everything that we do. But when I was 19, we were backpacking across Europe, and my one of my best friends was killed by a train, and so at 19, I saw her life get taken from her. And so that spun my life in a different direction than I think it probably would have gone. So for the next like 20, I mean, it's been 22 years now. And, I think I went and did things that made me happy. I was enjoying my life has always been fun. People have been like, "Oh, you're so lucky you get to do all these things," or and no, it's a choice that I make. It's a choice that I chose to see that life is short and to be grateful for what you have and to say yes to adventure and yes to yourself. And so I lived my life in that particular way. I did 47 countries later, a lot of bungee jumping, skydiving, and crazy things in between. I did land myself in a stable long-term marriage with kids and, family and stuff, but we still have adventures. The first year we moved, we live completely off the grid here. And we were grateful that I had a business that was able to support my family because my husband had to quit his career of 17 years to live here. So we were able to do that in a great way and have that kind of lifestyle that we wanted. We bought an RV and we went RVing all through California and Arizona and all southern US our first winter up here with our kids because that was another adventure, right? So just being so grateful for those experiences. But I think it really came down to that accident my best friend had when we were so young that it really made me realize like, you got to make the most of what you have. And I hope I pass that on to my kids in their gratefulness. We do the rose and thorn. I think I told you this before, Julie. We do the rose and thorn at dinner time, which is like, what was your rose for the day? What was your thorn for the day? And I'm just grateful for the lifestyle that we have and the ability to create income and revenue from our home and in a place that we love to live. So just so grateful for everything.
Michelle, I got chills when you shared your story, because I also backpacked around Europe with my best friend at around the same time.
Mhm.
And yeah, I can't imagine the impact that that loss at that age could have. And what I will say is that we do always have a choice of how we deal with tragedy and the difficult things that are going to happen in our life. And I say are going to happen because no one gets through this life unscathed. That we know for sure. We will all experience tragedy, and some of us more than others.
Mhm.
And taking a moment of tragedy and turning it into, a motto for life is so powerful to me. And I really felt that
Mhm.
in what you shared about, not only your own travels, but then in bringing it into your family
Mhm.
and sharing those adventures. And I just wrote down, like, what I just think is so important, what you said, is that you do the things that make you happy.
Mhm.
Those words seem so simple and so obvious,
Mhm.
but I encourage people that are listening right now or watching to just take a pause on that
Mhm.
and take inventory. And how much of your day are you doing things that make you happy?
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
That is why a podcast, I went through a moment of like, I finished my 100 episodes at the end of my
Mhm.
first year of podcasting. It's a lot.
Amazing. Congrats.
Thank you. And I was like, I mean, do I keep doing this? I don't know. Like,
Mhm.
it's, sometimes, Michelle, when you podcast, you're speaking into a vacuum, right?
Mhm.
People don't often take a lot of time to leave reviews or give you feedback. And every time like someone says that episode made a difference for me, I'm like jumping for joy because
Mhm.
you put it out there,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, you see all the downloads, but we don't know who's listened. We don't know whose life has changed.
Yeah.
But what I do know is that doing a podcast recording makes me happy. And the rest of the
Mhm.
day after I finish a podcast, I'm always like just feeling amazing. So
Love
now
that.
you get to host a podcast as well. So tell
Mhm.
us just a little bit about how you became the host of Blissful Parenting.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to tag on what you just said, Julie, is
Sure.
that I always feel like if you make a difference in one person's life, like that's all worth it, right? Because you don't know how many people are listening. And I have some clients that, only 100 people listen to this episode. I was like, really? You're in a room with 100 people right now, you'd be thrilled. And just think of how many people's lives are changing and there's 100 people listening. So I just wanted to share
Oh,
that because
I that's such a good reminder, right? We forget that,
Mhm.
yeah, if we were in front of those people. And it's true though that for every one person that sends a message, there are hundreds that were impacted but just didn't
Right.
take the time, have the courage, whatever it is. Maybe sometimes people, I think sometimes people are maybe intimidated to reach out to a
Yeah,
podcast host. I'm telling you right now,
absolutely.
podcast hosts love it when send them a message.
Exactly. Yeah. Tell us how we changed your life. It's
Yeah, or
awesome.
just tell us that you enjoyed an episode, right? So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny how became the host of Blissful Parenting. Is Blissful Parenting is not my business, but someone that I worked with closely in the space. He actually was originally my business coach in my co-working space and fitness business, and then when I started doing podcasting. And he had this company called Blissful Parenting, and I just loved it. And when I became a mom, I was like, oh yeah, I was just like learning so much from the community, and I became the spokesperson for the community, and then I started doing the podcast because I do it secretly, like you said, Julie, at the beginning of this for myself, because I learned something from all the guests that have been on there. And Julie, you've been on that show before, and I was learning so many things from all the guests that come in that really helped me with raising my kids and my lifestyle and being a good parent. So I just do that show literally for fun. I love it, and I just like being around and introducing new parenting experts to the audience. And I do have we do have Amplify You podcasts as well, where we get to really interview other hosts and podcasting experts and help our hosts make better shows and really amplify our hosts who have great shows. So I love doing that also secretly for myself. So it's all about me really, and all I learn, and I just love podcasting. It's my favorite thing. It's one of my favorite things to do. And like you said, Julie, as soon as you're done a podcast episode, it just makes your day, right? You get to meet new cool people, and I could have 10 podcasts and be happy. And if that's all I did, that'd be fine.
I know, right? Sometimes I'm like making sure I at least have one recording per week because I really look forward to that time.
Mhm.
And what's great is that, as we become better podcast hosts as well, we become better listeners.
Mhm.
and we become better question askers.
Absolutely.
Right? And those skills help in all the things that we do, right? Really, in business, I mean, the best thing you can do with your clients is ask better questions,
Right.
right? And that's a gift from podcasting. So, Michelle, you've been in this space for, over, I guess, almost a decade now. If
Mhm.
you could share with me one of the greatest gifts that you've gotten from being in this podcasting world over the past, I know it's almost a decade, hard to pick, but if there was something, what would that be?
Oh my gosh, I think overall, number one is the people I've met because of podcasting. So, having my own show or having my company, I've been able to open doors and have conversations with people that I idolize, that were the Hay House authors that I really love. Now they're some of my guests or some of my clients. Like, I just love the people that I've met through podcasting over the last 10 years has been amazing.
Awesome. So, Michelle, where is the best place to find you? Where do you like to hang out?
Yeah, that's a great question, Julie. Our website is under construction right now. So normally we have an amplifyu.ca website, but it is currently under construction as we're growing through some cool changes right now. But you can check out our Facebook group. It's called
Mm,
My Podcast Coach. That's where we love to hang out and celebrate the podcast community and share all about your show there. And you can find out about the Connect and Collaborate calls there as well.
yeah.
Otherwise, reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I mean, as always, the links will be in the show notes, but the group is really worthwhile if you're curious about this world, if you'd like to maybe start a podcast or you're curious about being a guest. The group is a really fantastic place and it's an active group. There's a lot going on in the group. I know you're probably thinking, I don't know, Julie, I'm already in 100 Facebook groups that I don't do anything with, but this is one I'm checking in, if not every day, at least 2 or 3 times a week. So it is a place where there's activity and it's exciting and everyone's always welcoming every new person in, right? So
Yeah, it's
yeah,
awesome.
it's amazing. All right, thank you so much, Michelle. I have absolutely adored our time together and I can't wait to share this with our audience.
Well, thank you, Julie, for having me. It's been my gift. So thank you.
Awesome. Oh.